Welcome to Economic Frontlines, where we analyze the most pressing economic challenges of our time. I'm John McMaster, and today we're tackling a topic that's affecting millions of young people on both sides of the Atlantic: the economic hardships facing younger generations in the U.S. and Europe.
And I'm Sarah Chen. The reality is stark, John. Today's young adults are navigating an economic landscape fundamentally different from what their parents experienced. From housing costs spiraling out of control to the weight of student debt, we're seeing a generation struggling to achieve traditional financial milestones.
Let's start with some sobering statistics. In Europe, youth unemployment has remained stubbornly high at 14.4% as of July 2025, according to Eurostat. While that's an improvement from previous years, it's still more than double the general unemployment rate of 5.9%.
And what's particularly troubling is how these economic challenges are manifesting in day-to-day life. According to recent European surveys, a staggering 93% of Europeans are seriously worried about making ends meet, with 40% of young people specifically listing rising prices and living costs among their top concerns.
The housing situation is especially dire. Between 2015 and 2023, average house prices jumped nearly 50% across the EU, with some countries seeing increases of over 100%. Meanwhile, wages simply haven't kept pace.
That's right, John. And this disparity is forcing young adults to delay independence. In Ireland, the proportion of working 25 to 34-year-olds living with their parents rose from 27% to 40% between 2017 and 2022. Similar increases have been recorded across Europe. In Spain, it rose from 35% to 42%.
I've been speaking with housing experts who call this a generational housing trap. Young people are caught in a vicious cycle. They can't afford rent, which means they can't move out and establish independence, which in turn limits career mobility and opportunity.
And let's not forget that in many European cities, the explosion of short-term rentals and properties purchased as investments has dramatically reduced the available housing stock for locals. As one young professional in Barcelona told researchers, "I've seen apartments without windows being advertised for €990 a month, with the selling point being for those who just want a place to sleep and save money."
Shifting to the United States, while youth unemployment is lower than in Europe, the burden of student loan debt creates a different kind of economic hardship. According to the Education Data Initiative, the total student loan debt in the U.S. has reached a staggering $1.81 trillion as of 2025.
That's an eye-watering figure, John. It breaks down to an average federal student loan debt of about $39,000 per borrower. And the burden doesn't end with graduation. Many young Americans spend decades trying to pay off these loans, which delays other financial goals like homeownership or retirement savings.
The contrast with Europe is interesting here. While many European countries have traditionally offered free or low-cost university education, the U.S. system has increasingly shifted costs onto students and their families. However, we're also seeing tuition costs rise in parts of Europe, too, along with living expenses.
Absolutely. In England, for example, student loan debt has passed €236 billion, with around €23 billion being loaned to students each year. And while repayment systems are generally more income-based in Europe compared to the U.S., the psychological burden of starting adult life with significant debt is universal.
Now, let's talk about wage stagnation. This is perhaps one of the most fundamental economic challenges facing young people today. For millennials who entered the job market during or after the 2008 financial crisis, and now for Gen Z entering during a pandemic, wages simply haven't kept up with productivity or inflation.
The statistics bear this out. According to labor market research, real wages, that is, wages adjusted for inflation, have been largely stagnant for younger workers over the past decade in both the U.S. and Europe. Meanwhile, the cost of essentials like housing, healthcare, education, and food have risen dramatically.
And this stagnation is happening despite many young people having higher educational qualifications than previous generations. The promise that education would lead to better economic outcomes isn't materializing for many.
That's a crucial point, John. The traditional narrative that each generation will do better than the last is being challenged. In the Netherlands, a recent Deloitte poll revealed that nearly half of Generation Z, 47%, and 46% of millennials feel they're living paycheck to paycheck, despite often having advanced degrees.
Job security is another major issue. The rise of the gig economy, temporary contracts, and part-time work has created a precarious employment landscape. Young people often find themselves piecing together multiple jobs without benefits like health care or paid leave.
And this precarious employment means many young adults can't build the financial cushion necessary to weather economic downturns. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed how vulnerable younger workers are. They were often the first to lose jobs or see hours reduced in service and retail sectors.
What's particularly concerning is that these aren't just temporary hardships. They can have lifelong economic consequences. Research shows that entering the job market during a recession can depress earnings for up to 15 years. So the timing of when you graduate can affect your entire career trajectory.
That's right, and it's something economists call scarring. Early career setbacks don't just delay progress, they can permanently alter your economic path. When you start behind, it's incredibly difficult to catch up.
Let's talk solutions, Sarah. What policies might help address these challenges?
Well, on housing, we're seeing some cities and countries implement stronger regulations on short-term rentals like Airbnb and introduce rent controls. Barcelona, for example, has taken steps to address their housing crisis by regulating short-term rentals and adopting rent controls.
And across Europe, there are increasing calls for greater public investment in affordable housing. The European Economic and Social Committee recently adopted a roadmap to ease cost of living pressures, which emphasizes the need for accessible and affordable homes, particularly for young people.
On student debt, we've seen various proposals in the U.S. for loan forgiveness and reform of the education financing system. The Biden administration has introduced several debt forgiveness plans, though they faced legal challenges.
And regarding job market challenges, some economists advocate for stronger labor protections, higher minimum wages, and investments in sectors likely to produce stable, well-paying jobs, particularly green technology and digital infrastructure.
One thing is clear, though. Addressing these problems requires acknowledging their structural nature. These aren't individual failings, but systemic challenges requiring coordinated policy responses.
I think that's an important point to emphasize. We often hear narratives about young people not working hard enough or spending too much on luxuries, but the data simply doesn't support those stereotypes. These are real economic barriers that can't be overcome through individual effort alone.
And there's a broader economic cost to society when young people can't achieve financial independence. Delayed family formation, reduced consumer spending, and lower economic mobility all have ripple effects throughout the economy.
Exactly. When young people can't afford to leave their parents' homes, can't save for retirement, and are burdened with debt, the entire economic ecosystem suffers. Consumer-driven economies need consumers who can actually consume.
Some young people are responding to these challenges by pursuing alternative paths, relocating to lower-cost areas, embracing minimalism, or focusing on entrepreneurship rather than traditional employment. But these individual adaptations don't address the underlying structural issues, and increasingly, we're seeing these economic frustrations translate into political engagement. Young voters on both sides of the Atlantic are gravitating toward candidates and parties promising to address housing affordability, student debt, and job quality.
That's right. Economic hardship is becoming a potent political force. As one European researcher put it, the housing crisis fundamentally puts Europe's economic and social model under strain. The same could be said for the U.S. As we wrap up today's discussion, what's your takeaway message for listeners, especially young people facing these challenges?
I'd say it's important to recognize that these are systemic issues, not personal failures. Build financial literacy, seek community support, and engage politically around these issues. And perhaps most importantly, don't internalize the narrative that you're somehow falling short because you haven't achieved the same milestones your parents did at your age.
the economic environment is fundamentally different.
Well said, Sarah. The economic headwinds facing young generations in the U.S. and Europe are substantial. But identifying and understanding these challenges is the first step toward addressing them. Through informed policy choices and collective action, we can work toward an economy that offers opportunity across generations.
And that's ultimately what matters, not just for young people today, but for the long-term health of our economies and societies. The challenges are real, but so are the possibilities for change.
Thank you for joining us on Economic Frontlines. I'm John McMaster.
And I'm Sarah Chen. Until next time, keep your eye on the economic horizon.